Hello, and welcome to Florida Watch. I'm your host, Doug Miles, and joining me on the panel today are Dennis Maley, the editor of the Bradenton Times, Cooper Levy-Baker, he's the editor of the Florida Independent, as well as former CBS White House correspondent Gary Schuster. Our first topic today is Tallahassee, and was quickly becoming a divisive climate among elected officials. And Gary, let me start with you. We talked a little bit about it last week with the situation up in Wisconsin, and that's probably going to bleed over to Florida with, I know, the teachers' unions are going to be protesting. Have we seen the end of the union movement, or what do you think is going to happen?
I don't think you've seen the end of the union movement, but I think you are seeing the beginning of the end of the union movement as we've known it. Things have changed from the mid-50s till now. The union memberships have dropped dramatically. From the 50s, 50% was down to like 12% in various places. 15 other states besides Wisconsin have already moved legislation into a position to pass that sort of ends collective bargaining, as has been the issue, except for wages. Some disallowing striking by public officials, government officials. So I think you're seeing the beginning of the end, only because I think the unions are still strong enough in some places to hold it off for a while. But between the budget problems that states are encountering, anti-union movement sort of in general over the past several years, you've seen it in auto companies, you've seen it in airlines, and they go after, to do it, I think Dennis said last week, states will declare bankruptcy, because that's what the airlines did. United Airlines declares bankruptcy, and they get rid of the unions. They get rid of the mechanic unions, they get rid of the ramp guys, everybody else. That's how you do it, and it could happen here. It's not beyond. They're going to start this first, but you've got new Republican governors, budget crises, and an anti-union sort of feeling in a lot of places. So I think it's the start.
I think so too. I mean, there are some significant differences between Florida and elsewhere. Florida, collective bargaining is constitutionally guaranteed in the state constitution. So you don't see the direct assault on that as you see like in Wisconsin and other states. But there are some other efforts that they're doing behind the scenes that are getting a lot less attention that have the same goal. And one of those is a bill that's before the state legislature this year that would stop unions from being able to collect their benefits through payroll deductions, which they don't have the infrastructure to collect them any other way, and that makes it easy on the union members, makes it easier for them to join, and so they really see that this could be the death knell for them if this law passes. I mean, that's the language that they're using at the AFL-CIO in Florida, for example. And so I think you see some efforts to really go after them and attack them. And let's not kid ourselves, there's a lot of partisan politics here too. Part of that same bill that the Florida legislature is discussing would also limit the amount of money that unions can spend on political office. So they can't support their candidates in elections. And so you see a really direct assault on sort of what they can do with their money and how they can get their money. And so that's going to be really interesting to see. I don't know how much the union is able to sort of rally its troops here in Tallahassee over the next few weeks, but we'll see.
I think you've already seen the beginning of the end of unions in general a long time ago. You haven't seen union growth anywhere. There's not really a climate or an environment that allows for that. But what you're seeing now is an outright assault on public sector unions, and I think this is going to be the death of them. Like Cooper said, it's either going to be the indirect ways or it's going to be directly, and you're probably going to see more of a fight with the direct battles like the ones in Wisconsin, but unions are over. And the unfortunate part is, I'm biased. I'm a third-generation Teamster. My grandfather was a truck driver. My dad was a loading dock foreman. I worked on a loading docks when I was in college, and I was able to earn a fair wage for a very profitable company, making about twice what the average college student was able to earn for their labor. So I saw the fairness in that. The company made millions of dollars, but I got paid a fair wage for it, much more than other people were getting paid for their labor. There's this misconception that unions are this bad thing by people who've never benefited from them. I was on the radio show yesterday, and people were calling in saying, well, I'm from up north, and you made more money up there, but it was cost of living was so high, it was all because of unions. This guy associated the cost of living in an area with a union somehow, mistakenly. But at the end of the day, if you look at these right-to-work states, there's maps on the internet, you can see which ones they are. Look at the average, they're the most economically depressed, lowest wage states. That's exactly right. And Florida, Texas, throughout the Midwest and South, And that's what's going to just continue to happen.
And the states that are adopting this potential legislation and moving it through their legislatures are Hawaii, Montana, New Jersey, New Hampshire, Ohio. I mean, it's all across the country, and it's not just, you know, it's not the Rust Belt states. It's Sunshine States. It's a bunch of different places where these issues have come to the fore. And because, like I say, of the new Republican governors in a lot of these places and the budget crisis,
yeah, I think you hit it there.
It's fueling
the climate. It's the
just,
people
it's
who
a
always
perfect
wanted.
storm.
Yeah, the people who always wanted to do this. This is the environment to do it.
This is a perfect storm.
Yeah, they're exploiting, I think, a crisis. You know, I mean, all these states are facing serious crises, and they have always wanted to do this. And this is just the opportunity they see because there's a lack of sympathy for, you know, guaranteed benefits amongst like the greater populace and a broad anti-tax sentiment that you see like in electoral politics. So I think that this is, you know, nothing new. It's simply this is their time now, and they see it, and they're trying to seize it.
How about the teachers, though? That's the one that's getting the most publicity right now. Teachers feel that they're going to be really in trouble now with trying to bust that union with getting rid of tenure, making it more of a merit pay system. I know there's a story yesterday I read about that they want to base the teachers' salaries on students' grades, not just sort of that test that they used to have, which they got rid of.
That won't be good in some states, I'll tell you that.
Probably not. But I mean, is that something I think people have felt now, and nothing against teachers, obviously, but I mean, shouldn't teachers have the same kind of merit system that the rest of us have in our jobs?
Well, I read a letter to the editor the other day in the paper that said that, you know, I have to work until I'm 70 years old now to try and earn a portion of it. And here's a teacher who can retire at 55 with basically 30 years in and get $26,000 to start with on top of whatever else comes along, and don't think that's fair. And that's sort of what people are thinking with these undefined, the pensions going away in a lot of places. They don't like what they see, and so the teachers are facing, and the teachers' unions, these uphill battles against this thought.
I think too, I mean, I think that with the teacher bill, I mean, there's a couple different strands to it. One is the merit pay, like you mentioned, and there's another point about just job security, meaning that this new bill that's making its way through the Florida legislature would allow teachers to be fired really for very little cause. And so I think that teachers are less concerned about the merit pay question and more concerned about that. They're concerned about job security. And you know, if merit pay is something that they sort of have to bargain with, I think that they would prefer not to have that. But if they have to bargain, they're willing to accept that. But the job security component, I think, is what really is concerning them right now. And that's, I think, driving really, you know, the demonstrations and stuff that I think we're going to see here in Florida over the next couple of weeks.
How about tenure, Dennis? I mean, isn't that something that's really hurting? The
tenure could be, and listen, there's bad teachers out there. Like there's a bad person in every field. The thing I always found funny is it's always a politician saying a teacher should have merit pay. I'd be all for it if the politician had to accept it first. But the politician, first of all, the ones passing it at the state and federal level, they both have way better pensions than you just described, and they get it right, and they get it quicker. They get it with one term. So for them to point this out is very hypocritical, clearly. But the other thing, when you brought up about, you know, the merit pay basis of it, you know, should it be paid for the students' grades? Let's look at certain situations and let's look what that says. If I'm a good teacher and I have a tremendous amount of potential, I'm at the head of my class, and I know I'm already going into a public sector where I'm going to make a lot less money than I'm worth in the private sector, but I'm willing to do that. What happens when I say, you know what, I'd like to go where I'm needed most, and I'd like to go into the poorest, most underfunded school and really make a difference, but I know I'm never going to reach my maximum pay level. I know that I have a good chance of losing my job because I'm going into a place without the resources, and I can make it better and make a difference, but then somebody who goes into the richest school district and benefits from that and does better is paid more. I can't see that. I
think there's also, I mean, that's the bigger concern, right, is the merit pay, merit decided by what? And I think that system for deciding, you know, how teachers are judged is really what's up for debate. And I don't think anybody, I mean, how do you sort of quantify, I mean, you know, how someone is doing in the classroom? I think that's really difficult to do. And so I think that that's one of the big sort of gripes that teachers have about that.
I think that's right. There's test scores. There's a number of ways to measure this, and nobody quite knows what it is. Is it a combination? Is it one? What are we striving for? You know, and then you got the school budgets that don't have nothing to do with how well they teach. You know, it's how many kids in a classroom. all kinds of other things that come into that formula.
I think also too, I mean, one thing I'd like to bring up is this is not just a state issue, but it's really at a federal level. And you see, House Republicans this week debating and voting to kill funding for programs like AmeriCorps. AmeriCorps is a program that's considered the domestic Peace Corps, sends usually young college graduates out into communities that really need a lot of assistance. They get paid very little. They're expected to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and are really, sort of driving a lot of development in some areas that really need it. And so I think, this is not something that's just happening in the state, but I think you see these cuts to public service, and really a disincentive to, give up a couple years of your life, for a greater good. You're not going to even be rewarded for that at all.
And that should be highlighted. We need to, as Gary said, before we even look at what standard, where's the merit coming from, but at the end of the day, I think we all agree, we need our best and brightest people in education right now. We're ranked 18th out of 36 developed nations, and we're falling consistently. And everybody's plan for optimism in the future is America capturing these new markets and being big in green technology in all these places. And I ask, how are we going to do that when we're so educationally behind countries like South Korea and India and all these places that we should be leading, the fields? We're not. So every plan that they're talking about are things that are going to keep the best people from getting into education. So to me, it really seems like a defeatist approach to it.
Yeah, I think you're not going to see the money flow into, America can't buy its way into this. You have to work your way into it, and you have to do it through education, and it's just not there. Other countries own our debt and are ruling us that way, and you can't just move and make it we'll buy this, we'll buy that, the old-fashioned way,
What's the long-term effect now? Dennis, you bring up a good point there. Kids in college now, used to be that was a profession, teaching, that, okay, that's a pretty steady job, and you were dedicated to it, but I don't think people in their teens now, maybe early 20s, are going to want to go into that field. Isn't that going to long-term have a negative effect? And now you're saying taking away money from arts and
somebody
sports.
Pointed a very interesting thing out to me recently that was sort of profound, and I think is missed by a lot of people. There was a period in the last 10 years where a lot of teachers retired who came from an era when women did not have the equality in the workplace, that if you were a valedictorian and you were 1,400 on your boards and you were female, you weren't going to law school. You weren't going to get your MBA. You were going to a teacher's college. And some of the best and brightest women in our country went on to become phenomenal teachers. Years later, those same women were in the boardroom and they were at partners in law firms, and we already started to have a drain on that. What you're saying here, yeah, I think that everything you're seeing, I think if you're going into college right now, says I wouldn't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole, even if it is something I'm passionate about.
And they know it doesn't make a lot of money. That profession's never paid much money. And I think that is because of the cost of things now. Students are looking at things that give them a better future.
I think also too, I think it's just going to drive inequality in America. I think poor education, what it's going to do is you're going to end up with a situation where you have students who simply do not have the skills to go out and be leaders, to go out and start companies, and their only role in the economy is going to be to serve the large corporations. And I think that's just going to drive greater and greater wealth inequality, which we already have. It's the worst it's been in almost a century. And so it's just going to sort of quicken that development, I think.
Won't that get more people interested in the whole voucher system? Get a voucher for your property taxes and take it to a private school, and that will, in effect, even make the public school system worse.
That's been a tough go. I was in Pennsylvania when that was going on and helped a friend of mine who was trying to do some things, was doing some writing, but it doesn't work easily. It's a good idea in some places where you can get maybe better education by doing that, but it doesn't work well.
I think Rick Scott has proposed. He's floated the idea of a universal voucher system in which every family in Florida just gets a check and they can spend it however they like. That's run up against, in the past, voucher systems have been shot down by the Florida Supreme Court. And actually, voucher advocates don't like that idea because they know if they go that far, it's just going to get shot down, and that discredits the whole voucher system. So there could be a third way where you do have some compromise between those two positions. But I think there there's a good article in the St. Pete Times when Rick Scott first came up with that idea, which was just like the number of schemers who are going to descend on Florida and open up a school because, suddenly you have families that are flush with this money, right, and, they need a place to spend it. And so I think it is like a potentially dangerous development, but it seems unlikely, I guess, to survive, even if it was going to get passed by the legislature.
Be like Joe's school down the street or something.
Sure, and I think what that does to the public schools, because now you're pulling more of the funding away from the worst ones, right? Because nobody's going to say, I want to take my voucher and go to the worst school, so they lose all their funding. They're going to end up closing because the enrollment's going to go down. All that's going to do is drive up the demand for the private school. What's the demand drive up? It drives up the price, and then that voucher isn't worth as much. It's not a sound circular process.
Speaking of Governor Scott, other issues that he's kind of floated, you mentioned about the voucher system, Cooper, also privatizing prisons. That's kind of gotten a little bit of angst going on up there. Dennis, is that something that's feasible, or what do you think about that?
It's a horrible idea when you put a $9 security guard in front of a prison. I did an expose on the Manatee County Jail, which is a remarkably efficient operation this summer, and they were faced with such terrible budget crunches. And what that did as far as the number of dangerous criminals per unarmed guard, it drove it up significantly. And there's very little empathy. And say, well, we don't want to spend money at the jail because it's for prisoners, and they think it's for luxuries, and they don't understand it's what the support system who guards the most dangerous people in our society. But the jail, the head of the jail said, look, when they privatize it and you put in basically a mall cop into these positions, then what do you see what happens? No, I think it's a horrible idea.
I think it's also tied in the discussion we were having earlier about unions. And I mean, this effort to privatize prisons is a direct attack on the Police Benevolent Association in Florida. Rick Scott has said his goal is to bring prison wages in line with private prison wages. I mean, there's no way around that except for to say, like, you cannot have unionization in the prisons, And this discussion is really being driven by some really huge national corporations. Corrections Corporation of America, CCA is one, and the GEO.
Who happens to be, by the way, the largest contributor to the Republican Party of Florida. The number one.
Yeah, and so I mean, it's no surprise these ideas are not new. They're just sort of fall in line with sort of Scott's agenda, and we'll see. I mean, it seems like another divide where you see between these tough on crime Republicans and what people are describing as a right on crime position. Trying to cut spending in the corrections industry, and so I think that's just another division, and we'll see kind of like which side of the Republican Party wins out in that debate.
You also have the issue coming up that's sort of before us, and that is whether you get rid of the Florida State Troopers. The governor has sort of made noise around
kind of floated out there
around that issue, and get rid of the Florida State Troopers and give those responsibilities to the local sheriff's offices, who have no money.
I heard Sheriff Knight speak on that at a forum this week from Sarasota County, and he was baffled by it. He said that the idea that, first of all, we don't have the expertise. You look at things like vehicular homicide and stuff like that. We don't have those departments. They don't exist within ours. And then we don't have the manpower. So we're going to come back to the county, and then the county commission was sitting there laughing like we have money to fund that.
Right. It doesn't make sense, but it's the kind of thing that's being floated out there as we approach this March 8th beginning of the Florida legislature. There's going to be really fireworks. You're going to see 4th of July long before the 4th of July in Tallahassee.
I think, too, if you got rid of the FHP, each county would have to have their own police department. You have to separate it where county lines ends, and there's no kind of overall governance of it.
Right. And I mean, this is a part of a larger, I think, trend that you're seeing, which is the dumping of a lot of enforcement responsibilities on local governments. I mean, you see it with immigration, since there is no federal immigration policy really, the state government, is trying to figure out ways to do it. And the only thing that they've been able to do is just dump the responsibility on local governments without giving them any additional training, resources, or officers. So I think it's part of that same movement, I think.
Well, I was going to say, you see the effects of this already with the library down the street here closed on Monday. Post offices are now thinking that they might cut mail back a day or two.
Get rid of Saturday delivery.
Yeah. So you're seeing services, and it's just the start, but services are being curtailed in a number of places, and it's going to get even worse now because of this budget situation in all states. I think all states are looking for ways to cut corners.
But sometimes there isn't even, that's only the guys that they bring these things, like Cooper said, that they want to do anyway in, because when you look at the prison population, about 4 or 5 years ago, we changed some sentence guidelines, and our growth has been near flat. We've had a little bit of prison population growth in the state of Florida, but it's been near flat. So there really isn't an argument. And the studies for the private prisons that are there don't show that they're any less expensive. They're saving money. So where we have state jails that actually have 25, 30, 40% vacancy in some instances, the idea that you would then close those down and shift them over into private facilities that would have to be built, it's going to be more expensive. But again, with a state jail, just like Border Patrol for Immigration, there's no private company who donates a bunch of money who's going to get rich off of it. And that's what this comes back on. It's not about solving a problem or changing the budget. It's about redistributing resources, to the private sector.
What would be the profit motive for a privatized jail? You'd have to have more prisoners in there to
more
make money.
prisoners, right.
So your crime rate goes up.
Guess what? They're talking about changing some of those sentencing guidelines, and now they're talking about using these to do diversion programs as well. So they're manufacturing clients for these organizations.
Well, they're trying to fill the jails up
by
doing other things.
If we went all private in jail, I bet you would get tougher on crime real quick, wouldn't we?
Yeah. Well, Corrections Corporation of America was one of the authors of the tough Arizona immigration bill. I mean, they were they were in part behind that because they saw, hey, this is a boon for clients. Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, I think you do see that definitely.
Let's move on to our second topic here. The State Republican Party of Florida. There's a talk that they'd like to move up the presidential primary to an earlier date in the year, which is coming up next year, by the way, which would give Florida obviously a little more influence and say in the next candidate. Dennis, I know you've wrote a little bit about this. Is this a good idea for Florida?
Listen, every state wants to do it because every state wants to be important in the election, right? At the end of the day, you have about 100,000 people participating in Iowa and the first, second, third early states that are deciding who the rest of us get to vote on, and people don't like that. Plus, the influence those states then have because all these potential candidates are going there for 2 years out and really wanting to be in the favor of Iowa. It gives them a tremendous amount of clout. The answer for this is very simple. You do a national primary for each party. Just like could you imagine if we did a presidential election that rolled like that? I mean, it's silly, right? But this allows the parties to control who gets nominated better when they're able to do this. Here's why this really matters to me. I'm 36 years old. I've been eligible to vote now for 18 years. So there's been all those cycles. I've never voted in a primary where it hadn't been decided by the time I got to my state. I lived in 4 different states during those times. I've never actually got to go and vote in a presidential primary where it wasn't already decided and everybody had dropped out.
Gary, I know you've covered primaries. Why don't you have one day where just a national primary?
Well, I think it's a little hard to coordinate. Plus, I think in the end, I think you have to have situations where politicians can make the rounds. It's tough to make the rounds around the United States with the money they can do. Certain states, not every state has a primary. Some of them just don't, they aren't included in them, right? I mean, they don't go to them. When I was with Reagan, we never went to Hawaii for the Hawaiian primary. You just assumed the party would take care of it there and you'd do it, or Alaska or other states.
Let me ask you, in this day and age, do they go to any of these places for anything else other for fundraisers? Because honestly, campaigning is done on TV, on the internet, through mass media. Do they really have to make the rounds? I mean, does somebody vote on somebody because they heard them speak at a rally?
The deal is, as a voter, they want to see and touch them. They want to see.
How many of those 55 million voters see and touch any of the people on the ballot?
Believe me, they go out. Having been, I've been in all 50 states a lot of times, much of it with politics, and there are big turnouts for these things. People get revved up for them. I suppose if you dismissed them and made it a national primary, which isn't going to happen, by the way, I don't think. If you did that, I think you would cut people's idea of being able to see and feel a politician. I don't mean feel, touch. I mean listen to his speech, even though it might be the same speech he gave in Iowa the day before and then it's in Illinois the next day. You're there, you see it, you feel it, you get a sense of that person. I was looking the other day, Mike Huckabee, who was the former governor of Arkansas, who ran last time around, didn't do too well. He's now got a book. He said he's never made so much money. He's got a book going on. He's got a radio show, television show. But he's thinking of running again. But he said the problem is you got to go late. He said, one thing I learned is you got to go late. You can't be out in those early states. But that, I think, is a mistake because, like you say, you got to do Iowa. The Republicans have, the National Party now has, in February, New Hampshire can hold a primary, Nevada can hold a primary, and
South Carolina?
South Carolina can hold a primary. Then in March, it's the states who divide up the delegates proportionately. That's all the states in March. Then in April, it's winner take all. That's how they've divided this up.
I think too, I mean, I see your point, Dennis, definitely, but I guess one thing that worries me about a national primary is then it's strictly decided on like who has the biggest paycheck, you know? I mean, at least if you're going state by state, there's a possibility that you could rally some grassroots support without necessarily, you know, pouring a ton of money into the campaign. I think if you go a national only campaign and you're solely dependent on television, then I think that that is just sending it to the highest bidder. I guess that's, you know, the concern I would have maybe about a national day.
I haven't seen it not go to the highest bidder yet, so I'm waiting to see that somebody could actually do the real grassroots politicking.
But I mean, like, I guess I'm thinking about somebody like Ron Paul, like we were talking about last week.
Again, how well did that work? To be honest with you, he would have benefited, every study showed he would have benefited from a national primary because his popularity was huge until the process taught people that, oh, he can't win. He can't win.
Well, you know, the first primary that these guys have to, and women, if there are going to be some, if Palin or others going to do it, the first primary they have to win is between their ego and reason. And reason has to lose. Because it doesn't make sense for them to do all that they do for so long, for 2 years. So that reason has to lose to ego. That's the first primary.
Gentlemen, we were so engaging today, we don't have a lot of time for closing comments. Maybe 10 seconds apiece down the line. Anything on your mind, Gary?
Only in the same vein. I think polls show what Republicans think, what Democrats think. The independent thought is what's going to take over, because there are a lot of Republicans, including a big shot Republican state rep over in Brevard County, who has switched to the independent party. Watch the independent column for where they're going. That's what the politicians are doing. The Republicans and Democrats are on the sides, but watch that middle column grow.
I say state legislature starts March 8th. I think next week is a bit of a lull, and you're going to see a lot of jockeying for position ahead of time there.
GEO, the prison company we talked about, watch for them. Anytime a company lavishes that much money around, somebody's going to come up dirty.
And one other thing, not political, spring training starts this week, so get out there and enjoy some baseball. That's going to wrap it up for this week. I'd like to thank the panel and also thank you for joining us, which of course you can do each week here on METV or watch us for free anytime at thebradentontimes.com. Till next week, I'm Doug Miles for Dennis Maley, Gary Schuster, and Cooper Levy Baker. So long, everybody.